Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Michael Edwards. I write as W.D. Drums, and Passion Inc.'s workshop this evening is Secrets of Anthology Writing. Who doesn't want to learn secrets, right? Which is our free workshop for both members and non-members with 5 accomplished authors whose stories appear in Passionate Inc.'s recently released anthology Soul Hates, which Kalia Wild is showing right here on the screen, and which is a charity anthology where all profits go to pro-literacy, to promote literacy, which is one of the themes of the stories is, well, first of all, the trope is enemies to lovers, but also literacy is a feature of the stories as well because of the purpose, the public service we are trying to provide here to strengthen civic society and the ability of people to read well. So tonight we have 5 authors, Kalia Wild, Marie Tuhart, Raisa Graywood, Riley Banks, and myself, W.D. Drums, as my pen name, who are featured in this anthology. And we are going to help you learn how writing for anthologies differs from other types of writing projects, help you discover how anthologies will help you reach new audiences and improve your writing, help you crack the enigma of themed anthologies like the enemies to lovers tropes of Soul Hates, will help ferret out where to find anthologies that where to publish your work, and get the lowdown on shady publisher practices you need to know to avoid. So our speaker bios tonight, we have Riley Banks, who writes award-winning spicy romance, mostly of the LGBTQ plus variety. She's a connoisseur of tea and gin and loves language, especially creative profanity. When she's not begging her characters to behave or reading fanfic, you can find Riley watching cooking how-to videos, traveling, or if you're lucky, crafting the next story to make you smile and set you on fire. Our next author is Kalia Wild, who believes the hero isn't always the good guy or girl. She believes some heroes and heroines cannot play by the rules to get their happily ever after. She is a writer of misfits, anti-heroes, villains, underdogs, fringe elements, and other tropes that will likely get her barred from polite society. As a feral Gen Xer, she spent untold hours roaming the woods in search of elves, fairies, dragons, or anything that would take her away from the dreaded curse of doing the dishes. She once fell off a wardrobe, but instead of landing in Narnia, a very empathetic order of "Don't Tell Mom" was decreed. In case you were wondering, yes, she landed on her head. As she searched for a career that would indulge this penchant for wearing black, she stumbled upon the world of special effects and excitedly pursued the art of sleeping in strange hotels, working ungodly hours, and handling anything that could and would burn, blind, freeze, or otherwise entertain wildlings like herself. Her paranormal and other contemporary romance fiction encompasses untamable heroes and heroines who aren't always good because that's where fun lies. Next is Marie Tuhart, who brings to life contemporary approaches, alpha heroines, and spunky women who take them to task. Alpha heroes, I'm sorry, the spunky women who take them to task. Her high-heat emotional books, many with BDSM elements, invite the reader to slide the silky scarves between their fingers and feel the kiss of a flogger on their flesh in breathless anticipation of what or who will come next. Embrace the temptation and happily ever after that will always be what she's about. Now, I, W.D. Drums, lives in Washington, D.C., and I have had a career in politics, law, and international affairs when I'm not writing high-heat literary love stories and romance, really more these days, to be honest. The author enjoys world travel, the outdoors, opera, musical theater, fine dining, and exchanging gossip in elegant drinking establishments. Raisa Graywood is a USA Today best-selling author of fabulously filthy smut. She's an empty nester and a cat snuggler. Raisa has worked as a teacher, an actuary. Her husband called her a bookie, which really isn't too far from the truth. Ain't that the truth? Wow. As well as a mother and a scout leader. She's happily married to her husband of almost 30 years and is now enjoying semi-retirement writing the book she always wanted to read with kick-ass heroines and sexy, sexy men. So those are our five panelists this evening. And essentially, we're having a panel discussion. We have come up with some questions in advance, and I'm sure we've actually probably have ones that I don't have on my initial list here. But basically, I think I'd like to put out the first question here and see who wants to take it. What's the trickiest thing about writing characters who hate each other? So like soul hates is a enemies to lovers trope, which is actually one of the top tropes out there, if not the top most desirable trope, according to research we were recently presented with in a different presentation recently. So we were right on top. Basically, Racer came up with the idea of doing a shadow poll, and that was what people were reading. And it turns out even more robust data supports that. So of any of our panelists here, what's the trickiest thing about writing characters who hate each other? All right. Well, Kalia, you kind of moved first. So, okay, I'm going to call on you.
Okay, well, the hardest part for me is not taking the hate too far. So you can have like animosity towards each other. You can be sworn enemies as far as, on two sides of the fence. But you have to be able to create that adhesion and that attraction element outside of the external factors that are the reasons why they should hate each other. They should be pretty much lockstep in sync of the same type of personality, because that'll help draw them together.
That makes sense to me. Are there any other perspectives on this from our panel? Yeah, Riley.
I definitely agree with Kalia. They have to be able to come back from whatever's happening, like whatever's happened in the past between them, or imagined or real. They have to be able to. They have to eventually get that commonality that brings them together. And I think that's a really tricky thing to be able to do. This was my first enemies to lovers that I've written, although I love reading it. But it's hard to get them to like, no, put it aside. You have to be able to, come on, guys, do your thing. And they're like, no, I hate this guy. Why would I do that? So you have to, well, I was going to say you have to wrangle them is probably the best, the best way to put that.
Even if they hate each other, they have to have chemistry. And there has to be that, if these guys ever get together, it will be so freaking hot. But man, that's a long trip. You have to show that chemistry on the page, even if they're still hating each other. There has to be something that they are drawn to each other about for. If a smell, or wow, she's really banging, or he's so handsome, like something, but I hate him. Oh my gosh, that kind of thing. There has to be fairly early chemistry, I think, which is really hard to do with people who hate each other.
Yeah. Although from a psychological perspective, well, I'm not a psychologist, okay, but there's this concept of psychological transference, which is like if you're emotionally aroused in one type of emotion, that can like transfer to a level of arousal in a different emotion or whatever. So it's like intensifying the emotional thing. So like hating somebody, if there is chemistry, like you're saying, and maybe that's part of why they're not getting along or whatever. But that like kind of ups the ante, or at least that's what I think a therapist would say. But it's like valid, at least from the standpoint of like writing stories. And, I think a lot of people have had sort of like similar experiences, I mean, to a certain degree, particularly like maybe in high school or like other sorts of school situations where it's kind of, you're sort of attracted to someone of the opposite gender, and then it becomes like kind of like we sort of hate each other, but not that. Anyway. Marie, you haven't said anything on this, have you?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what everybody said. This was my first enemies to lovers, and it was just kind of fun because she's like, I hate you, and he says, I don't care, I'm going to protect you no matter what. So they just had to overcome that little problem in their past, which wasn't so little.
Well, and so let's kind of, one of the promises of what we would learn here this evening, so like just to back up to a higher level, is exactly how does writing for anthologies differ from like writing a different sort of work? And so I could say this is the third anthology I've been featured in, which has all been Passionate Ink. So I'm very blessed to be involved with this organization. But we have a theme, a trope we have to do. You can't just do whatever you want. And it has to, sort of be complementary, and also it has to be consistent with kind of the theme of the organization and its, publishing standards and whatnot. I mean, in terms of what people want to read, like and then of course you have like word counts and whatnot, but I'm still a relative novice at all of this. I'd certainly be interested in the other perspectives that we have here about how to approach it. And, it's also a collaborative experience and a good way to, get publicity for your career. But does anybody want to share their perspectives on this part?
Why don't you pick people?
Okay. Well, how about you, Raisa?
Okay. I like writing for anthologies because they're kind of like a palate cleanser for me. I tend to write really long books, upwards of 70,000 words. So those little 15, 20,000 word anthologies are just kind of quick, and I can actually bring my own characters from my own books into them a lot of times. But one important thing to think about with anthologies is you are working with sometimes a large group of people. You will also have very firm requirements for your story. Like for the Passionate Ink anthology this year, it was enemies to lovers. If that's not a genre you're comfortable with or a trope you're comfortable writing, next year is forced proximity. So make sure that the anthology fits you before you sign up. Trying to write in an anthology, or this also applies to shared universes, multi-author series. If your work does not fit the premise of that anthology or the series, it's really frustrating to try to force it. And sometimes you can grow with that. Sometimes you can write in a new trope or a new genre that you haven't done before, and you can actually grow with that. For example, I was asked to write in one of the Dirty Daddies anthologies several years ago, and I had never done it before, but I said okay, and it was hard, but I got used to it. I got better at it, and those books are some of my best sellers. So when you're asked to, or you're vetting an anthology you'd like to apply to, make sure it's a good fit for you before you even get started. Unless you would like to use it as an exercise to write in a different trope than you're normally doing.
Thank you. Well, I guess, okay, so I'm going to call on everybody basically who's on the panel. So get ready for that. So Marie, what do you think?
Agree with Raisa. I've done some anthologies with my small presses, and we had, it had to be like, I had one that were around weddings and one that was around sports. So you have to be comfortable in writing those. I wasn't sure I could pull off the enemies to lovers, and many Passionate Ink members bugged me to go write this story. Just write one. You can do it. So sometimes it did take me out of my comfort zone, but I had a lot of fun with it. So as long as you know yourself as a writer and what you can do, I mean, anthologies sometimes are short. I mean, your story may only be 5,000 words instead of 10,000. So You got to take that into consideration. That's sometimes what makes it hard, is you don't have the room to expand.
Yeah, yeah. I was kind of lucky in that by the time the anthology was announced, I'd actually written like a very like rough draft of what ultimately ended up being my story, just because I'd had a inspiration for that sort of thing. Are there? Well, maybe I don't need to call on everyone, but does anybody else want to add from that before we move on to another question?
Riley,
I do.
Okay, both of you. Okay, first Riley, then Kalia.
I was going to say this is my sixth anthology, my fourth with Passionate Ink, and my second that I've run for Passionate Ink. And I think probably, other than what the others have said about having very specific parameters as far as the word count, as far as the trope, there's also firm deadlines that you might not have as a writer yourself, because you need to be able to make these. You have a cover artist. Well, in our case for Passionate Ink, we have a cover artist, we have an editor, so we need to make sure that we get the products to these folks and the information that we need from those, like the page count, for example, for the print version, to folks in a timely manner. So you may have deadlines that you're not either accustomed to working with, or maybe they're even somehow more loose than what you normally impose on yourself. I don't know. I work for myself and I run a pretty loose ship around here. So it's nice having specific dates that I need to get something in. So I think that's probably what I would say as far as it being different than writing normally for yourself.
And I'm going to pick up on Race's comment about make sure it fits into not really, she didn't say your lane, but what you're good at. And I'm going to say I use anthologies to write the stuff that I can't write as a normal writer, because my books, the best-selling line is biker romance. And so every once in a while I'll write a biker romance, like Holiday Shorts. It was a biker romance for that, but I'll go into the paranormal, I'll go into the science fiction. I've written 4 AMR anthologies, which is no longer, but they had 12 anthologies per year, and I would be in 3 or 4 of them at any given year, writing anywhere between, I think Passion Ink was the shortest ones at 10,000. Some of them were 25,000. So it gives me an opportunity to stretch those wings that I don't get simply by locked in contemporary adventure, romance, suspense type stuff. So I get to hit the paranormal and the sci-fi stuff. So
Cool. Well, being able to like explore new genres in an area where everyone it wants that genre and everything sounds really a good way to broaden your horizons. And let's segue into that in terms of basically reaching new audiences. I mean, has that helped you in terms of branching out?
Oh, for me?
Yeah. No, it's a follow-up question.
I have yet to hit on an anthology that's been as big of a hit as, say, Race's Dirty Daddies. I would love to get in on something like that. I've been doing a couple shared worlds, that sort of thing, and the Passion and Ink anthology, mostly as a way to give back, but also then the other pairings that I've done around the spectrum of authors that I know.
Cool. Raisa, what do you have anything to add about that in terms of reaching new audiences? I mean, you mentioned the Dirty Daddies anthology that Kalia just mentioned, which is why you're getting this question. Oh, she's muted. All right. Well, Riley.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm trying to clean up my kitchen from supper.
Oh, no worries.
I think it's going to be dependent on how big the anthology is and how many big name authors you have. For example, the Black Light World by Livia Grant and Jennifer Benet. They have some big name authors in that group: Renee Rose, Eden Bradley, Golden Angel, me, Stella Moore, a bunch of mid-list authors in this world. And they do have specific parameters to participate. But in that kind of anthology or shared universe, yeah, I think I did get a lot of new readers from those two, from Blacklight and from the Dirty Daddies. And I think it's really important to reiterate to vet your anthology, vet the organizers, make sure that check the other authors, make sure they're not. I wouldn't say avoid conflict, but you have to write to your conscience. If you sign up for an anthology and find someone you just don't want to be associated with, I would recommend not forcing it, because if you think a person is problematic, chances are someone else is too.
Mm-mm.
And also bow out early if you.
Yes, and definitely bow out early if you find it's not a good fit. And that doesn't make an anthology bad. It doesn't make you a bad writer. If it isn't a fit, it just isn't a fit. I was asked to participate in one regarding human lactation. I am not going to write that. I'm sorry. It is not a good fit for me. It doesn't make the anthology bad. It doesn't make anyone else bad. It just isn't a good fit for me. And it sold really well, and I'm kind of bummed about it, but it wasn't a good fit. And I would not have been successful at it, or at least I don't think I would have been, but we'll never know because I won't write it.
Well, so this is another promise of this was essentially, how do you find the right anthology? So so what do you think about that, Raisa? Like finding the right fit?
That is actually a big challenge. I kind of lucked out, and I got hit on the head by Marin Smith and said, "You're going to participate in this." And I said, "Okay," because it's Marin Smith. So she kind of dragged me through a lot of how to pick a good anthology. When I first started out, I swore up and down I would never pay money to be published in an anthology, and I do it all the time now. I will do it for Dirty Daddies because they take an author contribution to buy a good cover.
You might want to clarify that, Raisa, because most of us are in the do not pay to publish at all.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. Anthology organizers. The Dirty Daddies is one of them.
Would you actually mind defining an anthology, just in case we have any newbies here who have never?
An anthology is a single volume with individual stories by multiple authors, or it could also be a single author with multiple stories. These will be published in a single volume, copyright attributed to every author in the anthology, plus if it's published under an organization's umbrella, that umbrella will also be added to the copyright. The anthologies we're talking about are generally genre fiction of some nature. For example, the Soul Hates anthology is enemies to lovers, with a literary element because we're supporting a literacy charity. What else would you add?
So there's a question in the chat that asks, how much is a buy-in for an anthology, and is there?
It depends. It depends. A buy-in is not the same as paying to have your book published. Normally, if an organizer asks for a buy-in, it will cover the cover art and possibly some Facebook ads. It just depends on how large the anthology is and to some degree, the reputation of the publisher, or I'm sorry, the reputation of the organizer. Has this organizer had successful anthologies in the past? And if so, how many? Have other authors had problems with this organizer, et cetera, et cetera? I'll use Dirty Daddies as an example. Their buy-in is $100, which goes to the cover and goes to Facebook ads. That money is also refunded back to the author in the first royalty check. So I guess it's sort of a buy-in, but really not.
Well,
It's a little confusing.
with that one, you're getting, if is kind of going to sell well because it's a well-known anthology series or whatever, I guess.
Exactly.
It's like less of a risk, because you'll earn it back almost.
Yeah. And Jordan is asking how much, and do you have to pay for your own editing? The buy-ins, I've paid anywhere between $100 and $300. A couple of the smaller ones have been 40 or 50. And these are markedly different from the vanity presses that are asking for your money. Anthology organizers, at least the ones I'm familiar with, don't have slick websites. They don't do a hard sell. They're not going to promise you guaranteed sales. And they're not going to ask you for thousands of dollars and never give you your books. They're going to say, the buy-in's $100. Here's the contract. You don't like it, there's the door. Because they have other authors that will write for them.
And let me just interject on that, sorry, because Passionate Ink's anthology has no buy-in. There is a contract, and the organization actually covers the editing and the cover.
That is actually one. Yep, that's one of our member perks. Actually, is that it is a members only anthology.
Getting in there, it's okay. You explained it really, really well anyway, so that's perfectly cool. I love that. So what was the next one? Yes, there's a contract. It depends on the anthology whether you have to pay for your editing or not. For Passionate Ink's anthologies, we never charge our authors for editing. We do require that you participate in paired critique, but we will never ever charge you for editing. And that cost is completely Passionate Ink's responsibility. The proceeds from our anthologies are all donated to Pro Literacy. We eat all of the expenses for that anthology.
Answer Carol's questions there. If you guys don't mind, if I
go for it. Go for it.
So most anthologies, they can really be, most of the time that you will see, they will be whole stories. I have participated in some that have been up to 10,000, such as the Passionate Ink one. And I have actually submitted to an anthology that was 300 words, but it was a whole story in that little arc. It was very difficult. Writing really short is very hard.
It is.
But yeah. Most of the time it's not an excerpt or a sample of something. So you will most likely find that most anthologies are a whole story arc for whatever that happens to be. And then the paired critique is, at least for the Passionate Ink anthology, we require that the authors are paired up, and they each get usually about 2 stories to critique. So they get experience with critiquing other people's work and also with taking critique, which, especially if you're a new author, you may not have experience with either of those things. So it's nice. It's a nice way to get your feet wet with experiencing these parts of the author business in a safe environment where it's, if you have questions, you can ask, or if you need help with something, you can do that. So it's a really nice way for folks to interact with each other and get author experience at the same time.
Yeah, and I would second all of those things in terms of the experience, and it just helps season you as an author. And then there's another question here, which is, are all stories submitted accepted to the Passionate Ink anthology? That is not the case. We have a limit of how many stories we would accept because the editing costs are typically by the word, and if we're lucky enough to get more than our limit that we're good, then we would be lucky. And of course, there can be ones that don't meet kind of our editorial standards. For example, if you were to write a Marquis de Sade style story, that would probably be beyond the pale here.
I do want to clarify that we do take erotic fiction and
Yes.
erotic
Yes.
romance for the anthology, but and they do not have to be perfect, especially if you're a new author, which a lot of anthologies do require you to, as Raisa said, to either pay for your own editing or it has to be very close to being published. Ours is not exactly that case because we do recognize that there are new authors who do participate. So it's basically the standard is as best as you can get it. Maybe it's gone through your own critique group. Maybe you don't have a critique group and you need to have other folks go through it. That's why we go through this process with you. But yeah, there could be content issues too. There's a list on the anthology section of the website. I'm not sure if that's still up because we just published it, but there's
it is
the
still
standard
up. I
things.
just need to update it for the trope for next year.
Yeah, it's just the standard stuff like bestiality and necrophilia and all the stuff that would probably get us banned from Amazon because we want to be able to make money for pro literacy. So we need to have
yes, and it has to fit with the genre, of course.
Yep. Yeah, if you didn't write to the trope, for example, it would be like, well, I'm sorry, it's a great story, but we can't take it. So, and also Jordan just put the Passionate Ink website in the chat. So if anyone's interested in checking out the anthology page, on there.
So Marie, do you have any thoughts on these topics?
Pretty much. I mean, most of the anthologies I've done, the only kind of type of buy-in I've had is either paying for the cover, that's when it's in a shared world, or just putting up some money so we can do some promotion on it, ads, all that kind of stuff. I kind of agree with what everybody said. I mean, sometimes they're easy to find and sometimes they're hard to find. And finding what fits for your writing and what you write.
I was going to say there's even a Facebook group out there for romance anthologies. So like you can even find them through that way or other writers groups.
I forgot about that website or the Facebook group for anthologies. I haven't looked in there for a long time. But yes, that's a really good resource. And a lot of times you'll find that the details for the anthology are laid out, whether it's a trope-based anthology like the Passionate Ink ones, or the Dirty Daddies, or some other kind of. I just lost my word. I'm sorry. I'm so tired. Something else in common that you might be able to fit your writing in, or use it as an experiment to write in a different trope or genre. But yes, anthologies can be a really good way to season yourself and get a little bit of experience, especially if it's something that you're not used to writing, but are open to feedback and critique on that.
I just put the link for at least the one that I'm aware of, the Facebook anthology group in the chat.
I think.
And also another good way to kind of stick your toe in is if you're interested in an anthology and you can't find one that you're interested in submitting to, make your own.
And
you absolutely can.
And Ryan just commented that, rather trope, it can be subject matter, like he's involved in one where the main character has a disability. So we got another question here. How long does it take to get your rights back to republish, redistribute your story? And I mean, also, any thoughts on like red flags as well?
Sure.
But in terms of the rights, that should be, I guess, the first question.
Well, for the Passionate Ink anthology, we've been doing about, I think last year's for Hot and Sticky, it was 90 days. And then this one and some of the past ones have been 180 days. So, 120. Sorry.
Yeah, this one is 120 because it's going to go 30 days citywide and then one 90-day run through Kindle Unlimited. And then it will be back to the authors.
Yeah, we do everything very above board here with Passionate Ink. We have a contract, and it's written into the contract that the authors will get a written rights reversion letter when the anthology is taken down. So it's out for a specific amount of time, and that probably varies based on anthology, because I've definitely seen some just hang out there on Amazon for a year plus, or maybe they're just out there forever, which is, I'm sure, a possibility. Like a few of the ones that I've dealt with have just been kind of on there, and they, it's typically written into the contract. You'll get your rights reversion letter, and then you can do whatever you want with them. And as far as red flags, I would definitely say no contract.
Yeah.
No written contract would be the biggest red flag. Even if it's a crappy contract, I at least would like to see that someone made the effort to try to legally do what they're doing and give me some terms. But I would probably say anything beyond that, like no clause to get your rights reverted, would probably be a huge red flag. I don't know. I'm sure that there's a ton of them. So yeah,
because then you can republish. So Kalia wants to say something. So
Yep.
Okay, so red flags to look out for. No contract obviously is one. Your organizer does not answer back. So, they set up the anthology, everybody's gung ho, and all of a sudden there's crickets from them. You don't have the links to promote. That's a red flag. And you've put in all your time and effort, and the person that's running the anthology hasn't given you the information that you need to get that word out there. I went through that. I went through an anthology where the proceeds were supposed to go to a charity. I don't think they did. Another charity or another anthology that I was in, and this was the one that was consistent. I was doing 2 or 3 stories a year. The organizer died without a business plan in place. So everybody's stories were locked up. And we didn't have any kind of recourse on that at all. So it had, there's, and don't get me wrong, this was a wonderful anthology series. It was a wonderful team to work with, but she just didn't have a business plan. So, there has to be some sort of like succession plan and some sort of like aid or helper that has the keys to the kingdom, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Mozart didn't have a business plan either. And I don't know if you saw the Amadeus movie, but it didn't turn out very well for his estate. Marie, do you have any thoughts on this that you'd like to add?
Pretty much the same thing. I mean, I've been in charity anthologies that have only run for a month. And I've been in other anthologies. It's been, 8 months to a year before I get the rights back. So you work with what you're comfortable with. I did have one shared world series where the coordinator did flake out on all of us, and luckily somebody else picked up the pieces. But it was like very difficult because we're all like, okay, wait a minute, what's going on? I can't get a hold of anybody. So it is very difficult. So you got to kind of research, like, I know this person's name. I will never do anything with her again.
Well, okay, but what about the best thing that ever happened? That's our follow-up question, which is our cue to turn positive. So
I did want to say one thing real quick about
all right. Before we get positive, one more.
Before we get on the good stuff, I would say I have not dealt with this personally, but because every anthology I've done has either been the proceeds go to charity, so I don't get paid anything, or I got paid a flat fee, and then that's it. So no royalties. But if it is an anthology that is for multiple authors and you are getting continuous royalties from it for however long it's out, make sure all of that is in writing. Who you get paid from, how you get paid, all of that needs to be in the contract, or your specific contract for you, because you want to make sure you get your money. I mean, that's really it. Why you're doing this for a reason.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
the terms that are in a contract are kind of like the minimum amount of time before you can complain. So
Mhm.
like if it
Yeah.
doesn't say anything, it's hard to complain. And if it said a year, you couldn't complain until you didn't get the money after a year.
Yes, and do make sure that the process for non-payment is laid out in the anthology.
And the process for complaining.
And the process for
Yeah.
complaining. Also, watch for, actually, Riley mentioned this, a flat fee for selling your story. A lot of times, if you sell a piece, a story to a publisher for a flat fee, you are selling also your copyright.
In my case,
That
I
is
wasn't.
called a work. That
Yeah.
is called a work for hire, and I'm not saying it's bad. It could be a good choice for you, but you have to recognize that you will no longer own the copyright to that work.
Yep. I do have to specify that was not the case with the one that I did. It was a flat
Yeah.
fee, and it also was non-exclusive, so I still had
Okay.
could still publish that story.
Okay, that's great, but just
Yeah, no, it's a good.
I
it's a
mean, I
good
love
thing to look
that
for.
better, but the flat fee is often a work for hire, which means you sell your rights to that story to the person who buys it.
Yeah.
So just make sure that you understand what you're doing, that you're not stepping into that and accidentally selling a story you want to keep.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, if it's not a work for hire, then you have these the right actually to end the copyright arrangement during a window 28 years out as well, and even if you sold on bad terms. So that's like one of the big fundamental things. And there have been some people who've really gotten screwed on the work for hire approach. Like, for example, the lady who wrote the feminist work, The Scum Manifesto, who was like homeless, basically sold that book for $500 in the 1970s, and it became a bestseller. But the like guy who, the publisher had like bought her lunch, so she was like, oh, $500, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that going on. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah. So like let's turn to our trope here, enemies to lovers, as we started off with that. In terms of, so is there anybody here who it was the first time, well, other than me, writing enemies to lovers? So this was my first time writing enemies to lovers. So I was an enemies to lovers virgin. And so were Marie and Riley. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, does anybody want to, share their experience with the group on that? I mean, I thought it was really interesting. I'd written stuff, a number of different tropes, forced confinement or whatever, that was kind of like in a spaceship sort of thing. So it made sense. Enemies to lovers, initially I was kind of like, oh gee, and then I was like, wait, I already started writing an enemies to lovers story because I was doing a version of Pride and Prejudice, which is one of the best known enemies to lovers. But Marie, Riley, do either of you want to
Go ahead, Marie.
what it was like? Okay.
Well, as I said, I wasn't planning on writing for the anthology. And of course, several, Raisa, Jordan, kept bugging me to write. And I was thinking about it, and I think I had 2 weeks before the deadline, and two characters talked to me.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah, and I actually wrote the draft in 3 days of 10,000 words. Let it sit for 2, went back and rewrote the whole thing in another 2 days. And
Nice.
it was not something I was expecting to work, yet everybody said it worked. I thought, nah, this isn't going to work. They're not going to want it for the anthology. And I liked it, and it's now going to be eventually a intro into a new series.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah.
Really funny how that happened.
So Riley, did you say you didn't want to say anything, or did you say you wanted to? I couldn't
No,
tell.
I can comment
Okay.
on that.
All right. All right. All right.
Yeah, no, it was my first attempt at that. I love reading it. I love banter. I love writing banter. I love like characters who just butt heads with each other, and they're snarky and they're just pissed off with each other or something that's going on. Or I just love reading that kind of stuff too. So it was a lot of fun to write. Because of the word constraint being about 10,000 words, I was like, oh man, I probably could have gone on a lot longer, putting scenes in with them just ripping into each other about all sorts of things. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a good time.
What was
10 out of 10 would write another one.
Was it easier to write the bickering or the sexy scenes?
Both. I think
Both were
yeah.
easier. That doesn't
they're
seem
about
to
the
be
same.
logically consistent.
Yeah.
No,
It's
that's
about even.
logically consistent because I was able to write both fairly easily.
Kalia, Reza, do either of you have something you'd like to add about either the trope or the bickering versus sexy scenes writing?
All right, I just got to show this because this is hilarious. This is 3 of the 7 books that I have written in a series that are enemies to lovers.
Okay.
And I'm going to pull up this one because this one was Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, wow.
Families,
The original enemies to lovers.
Which doesn't have a together ending unless it's, together.
Well, yeah. This one though, yeah, it's definitely, kind of self-aware because at one point he says something about how she's prettier than a rose and she goes, Julia died. So it's very self-aware. But yeah, I love enemies to lovers as far as a trope and as far as the bickering. It adds so much to the story to pit people against each other. I mean, you don't need much of an outside plot when you've got people who are fighting each other.
Internal conflict, man versus man. Oh, right there.
Yeah. And one of the best ones that I've read recently, and this is probably one of the other questions, and I'm jumping ahead, but Holly Black's The Cruel Prince. Oh my God. I was so blown away by how well those enemies were laid out, and you hated the prince. You hated him. And yet by the end of the book, you were just like, I can't wait till these two get together. So, it's I love it. I love it.
Cool. Let's see. I thought it was fun too, I mean, anyway, it's, there's a reason, if you look at, say, Pride and Prejudice, for example, there's like a million adaptations of it or reworkings or whatever, because it's like so classic. And, with that particular book, at least as it was explained to me in like English class, the key thing about it's supposed to teach you about dating. And that the key thing about it is that, at least in the early 1800s, and that the key thing about it is that Mr. Darcy decides he wants to change. Like Lizzie doesn't go being like, oh, he's a project, I'm going to try to change him. She's like, oh, no, I like, whatever. And then he's like, oh, wait, I guess I have to change my ways. And so, it's of his own free will, essentially. And I think like that's a key part of the trope, not just Jane Austen, essentially, that, it's not that the heroine shouldn't, be trying to reform the hero. It's essentially like the hero has to reform himself. So I don't know if anybody if anybody agrees or disagrees with that. I don't know. Kalia, you're shaking your head.
No, I'm shaking my head because I'm like, I love using retellings. One of the ones that I really, really want to visit is, I'm losing the name. It's Kate and Shakespeare. And,
Taming of the Shrew.
Yes. And that in itself is kind of It's a very odd enemies to lovers because they're not enemies, but they hate each other and then they love each other. And
Oh, 10 Things I Hate About You is perfectly done
it
too.
was
Like that
so
type of thing.
awesome. And then
Yeah.
he was just lovely to look at too. So
But yeah, retellings are a fabulous way to get story ideas for anthologies too. So if you've ever always wanted to, retell a story, then find an anthology that works for you. You could try it out with that.
Yeah, and then that kind of gives people a shorthand of like what to expect, but you put a novel twist on it and it seems entirely new. Especially you reset it in a different time or place or whatever.
and not only that, but you take that character archetype, like who's your Mercutio and who's your prince, and you figure it out, but you have a totally different story. Well, you're carrying on that archetype, so it's fun.
Well, and so what inspired you, Kalia, for your particular story idea, which was involved a lot of like undersea stuff and things like that, essentially enemy lovers between, is it a mermaid and
Mermaid and a Kelpie, actually.
A Kelpie, a shape-shifting enemy of mermaids.
Yeah, the water horse. And I took the two warring pantheons as the two houses of Verona. But it was actually started as we should do a paranormal motorcycle shared world and with all of these bad boy type things, and nobody wanted the Kelpies because Kelpies kill kids. And I was like,
well, we left out the child killing.
I mentioned it.
Yeah.
Which is just bordering a little bit on that. Oops.
Marie, how about your idea? How did you come up with it?
Well, I want to say my brain works in weird ways. I really didn't come up with it. The characters did.
What's the gist of it too?
The gist of it is it's a mafia book in a way. And the heroine's father got her out of the mafia years ago, hid her and her mother away, just as the hero was going to ask her to marry him. And he thought she was dead. And it's now 10 years later and he finds her. So he kidnaps her.
Because of course he does.
As you do.
Of course he does. Yeah.
Why not?
Why not? Yeah. So, she's like, no, I'm not going back to that. And he's like, well, technically I'm going legit. And she's like, you can never go legit. They're not going to let you go. So we have a series. And then she ends up getting kidnapped by the bad guys. But the next time she fights back really hard. And he kind of sends a message that you don't bug my family.
I love that.
That's awesome. Raisa, how about you? How did you come up with your story?
I wanted there to be a teacher, and I wanted my couple to have like a childhood friendship. So it just kind of came to be. Enemies to Lovers is my favorite thing to write. Almost all of my stories have at least a few elements, even if my couple isn't entirely antagonistic. There's going to be an element of enemies to lovers in all my stories because I love writing it so much. And I find it really easy, so I can put even people that like each other together and make them fight, which is also fun. But I wanted it to be something to do with education. I wanted one of my characters to be a teacher or something along those lines, or something to do with education to get in that literacy component. But I wanted them to be completely different people from when they were children, which also kind of exacerbated the conflict because they were not the same people they were.
Well, that's impressive to do in 10,000 words or less. But
not easy.
real character development. You don't want a situation where the characters don't develop, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Riley, how about you?
Um, I love a good sports rivalry. This is my first time writing a sports romance too, so I kind of jumped in with both feet on this. But I also don't watch football. So I wrote a football romance because why not, I guess. Don't worry, I had like people who actually do watch it, like go over stuff. So it's football-y accurate. But I had a really great time writing it and learning about the sport. And there's not too much that's hotter than two guys in tight pants who hate each other. So,
I know it, especially if one's a tight end, right?
there is a joke about that. So
Yeah.
they just hand it to you. So, you have to go with it. Yeah, I love a good sports rivalry. So that's kind of where that came from.
Well, and for mine, so with mine was kind of a meta literary experiment, which is I thought about, well, what if it was a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but with Mr. Hyde as Mr. Darcy and Lizzie being played by the Cumaean Sibyl from the Aeneid, and it's set in hell, but it's a genre of hell that follows the romance genre. So it's basically a rom-com. So it's anyway, so really out there, but very meta literary. And given the literary theme, it's also one of the problems of their job, because they have jobs in hell, is because it's hell, that there's illiterate centaurs who are unsafe at work and they need to try to teach them how to read. But, the devils don't really see the need for torturers to know how to read, because, I mean, you don't really need to know how to read to torture people. So anyway, I think we have time for a few more questions. If people in the audience have questions, please drop them in the chat. I have.
There's one in there. There was one in there
Yes.
from Carol actually about the best parts, which I think I just kind of like steamrolled over that one before.
Do it. Go for it.
Honestly, the best part about having done anthologies, because yes, I do think they're worth it, is for me personally, I was able to get 2 books done in a 4-book series because they were both anthology stories, and I got my reader magnet done out of it. These were all stories from the Passionate Ink anthologies, and so they were edited, they were vetted by folks who presumably didn't hate them essentially. So at least that they were good quality and they were ready to go. So I think the accomplishment factor is a big one for me. It's really nice to be able to have those boxes checked. At the time I didn't have a reader magnet, and I wrote used the one from not Holiday Shorts, Hot and Sticky, for my reader magnet, and it was perfect. And since monster romance is a big thing now, it's even more perfect. So yeah, that's one of the best things that I've gotten out of it. So
Monster romance is really big right now.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So are there any other perspectives on that? From our panelists, anything people would like to add on that? I can ask a few more questions here, but we can go for more time here. So, Kalia, you want to add anything onto that?
The best part of anthologies, like Riley says, having your reader magnet, having something free to give to your readers. And not only that, but, right here, Passionate Ink, and I'm going to plug really hard right now, Passionate Ink Anthology, the proceeds go to proliteracy.org. That organization is the world's leader in advocacy and program support for adult literacy. So somebody who's struggling getting a job because they can't read well or they can't read at all, proliteracy.org does things for them. And just being able to give that back, it's 10,000 words. I do about 10,000 words in 2 weeks with my day job and my other books and stuff. So it's 2 weeks out of my year to just give something to an organization that's really good, and also give my readers something that they can enjoy. So, and that's maybe a little bit off the wall from what I normally do, but it's just lovely that it's there.
Also, Pro Literacy is a big fan of us. They know exactly what we write. They know exactly what the anthology is. And Jordan, as president, actually did a really great interview with them during when the Hot and Sticky anthology came out last summer. 2023. So that was really nice. They're huge fans of us. So.
Yeah, well, and you have to, if you found no other good reason to learn how to read, reading spicy stuff could be what finally brings you in,
Reading is magical.
I know. Well, in so many countries, the only countries that have 100% literacy are like ones like North Korea, where they're like cooking the books. Even in a country like the United States, where we're supposed to have 99% literacy, that's like millions of people who can't read, basically, because we're talking about like over 300 million people.
Yeah, it's a great cause.
That's a really low bar for what qualifies as literacy as well in that particular assessment. Another question here is just in terms of the people who help coordinate the anthology, and I think Riley, you were involved in that, right? And Raisa as well, and anybody else who's been involved in that. So what
Marie.
kind of work is involved in that?
It was Riley, Raisa, and Marie. So that was
okay.
Yeah, it's been a good experience. A lot of wrangling as far as timelines and things. If you're going to do an anthology, you need to essentially reverse engineer, especially if you know what time or what date you want your anthology to come out on. You need enough time to manage all the different stages. So you need to be able to make sure that you can have the cover designed in a timely manner, as well as the editing. If there's hiccups along the lines, there's always something that goes wrong. I use that term loosely because it's not usually world ending, but like your editor gets the flu or something like that and is like 2 weeks behind or something. These things can happen. So most of the coordinating is actually just is wrangling that kind of stuff, is getting the timelines down, making sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to do, and also making sure that these are communicated in a timely manner, in a clear manner to the participants. Everybody needs information. So we need to make sure that that's out there, and also that you have answers to people's questions. You need to be approachable about it. You need to make sure that you can answer them, and make sure your T's are dotted and your I's are crossed, essentially.
Cool. Well, Marie and Raisa, I don't know if do you have anything to add to that?
No, not really. Just keeping, and like Riley said, developing the schedule for the anthology is essentially reverse engineering, but we will also, and a lot of anthology organizers do this, they pad their schedules.
Yep.
If I give you a date, that is your date. I will pad that by at least a week in case you're running late. Like me, who had a story due last week, but has no bathroom.
Yeah, I know life happens, right?
Yeah, so I also lost electric
service
service to my house yesterday, and a whole laundry list of things, but my house is trying to drive me crazy and or broke. So anthology organizers will often give themselves some padding of it up to, in the anthology, in the Passionate Ink anthology, it was 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Between the time I asked the participants to give me their stories ready for formatting to the time I actually had to have it done. Just in case somebody was ill, somebody's electric main went out, somebody's kitchen is being remodeled. All those kinds of things happen. So if I tell a participant I need it on this day and they're late, I am not in a bind to get something up for Amazon.
And I think that there's a good amount of give and take too with that expected from the coordinators to the participants. Like if we communicate things to you, we expect you all the participants to communicate back to us. So if you are sick, if you are running behind, please let us know, because the earlier we know these things, the earlier we can take care of it, or fudge around, or like put somebody else's story into the editing queue ahead of yours, or something we can do to mitigate what's going on and get things back on track. So, I think that's a big thing, is communication both ways.
When communication
Yeah.
is essential in so many things, but especially with this and, everything kind of being email and stuff like that. If people don't, hear things or people are not responsive, things can go off the rails. Passionate Ink dues are only $45 a year, and you get at least 4 this year, 5 free workshops, plus discounts on all the other ones. So that's on our workshops page on our website if you're interested in signing up for that.
I'm looking forward to that one. And I also want to just hop on that plug real quick. And another fabulous membership benefit is the anthology. Like we said, we cover the cover, we cover the editing. You basically get your story finished in a nice finished package for you when you get your rights back to do as you wish. And that's our goal for our members and our participants, is to get you published and experience with publishing in a safe environment. So it is a members only anthology, and the 2025 anthologies theme will be the trope of forced proximity.
Forced proximity. So that's a good reason to join. That's really been the biggest value for me as a member, is, getting published and paying my dues as an author, and learning how the industry works and all that. So it's really invaluable. The $45 is well spent, let me tell you. And of course, you also can get access to our previous free workshops and our author salons, which are longer, more involved kind of seminar type things, and our other member services. But we record all our workshops, and they're made available at least for several months afterwards. So if there's any other questions people have, please, now would be the time to ask them. Just put it in the chat. In the meantime, are there any kind of final thoughts anybody would like to share? Kalia, Raisa, Marie, Riley, any kind of closing thoughts? Buy the book, buy Soul Hates. It's $4.99 on Kindle. You can also get paperback copies. It's only going to be in print for a few months, so we get our rights back and can
I know. Look at that chunky boy. Show it up again, Kalia. Look at that chunk. Seriously.
No, it's well worth the money, let me tell you. And at the very least, you can have, read it to your friends at dinner parties, all sorts of things. You can use it for whatever you need.
Just one quick thing, and before we wind up, I believe we will be taking submissions around Valentine's Day is when they will open. So if anybody had any questions, like, oh my God, how long do I have to take? Do I have to write this forced proximity story? We'll start taking submissions around then, and I believe we're usually open for about a month, one or 2 months for submissions call. So you got some time.
Yes, it's something to do in the next few months. And it's I've got something like a 6,000 page, or no, not page, word rough draft.
We will not be taking 6,000 word stories. 6,000 page stories.
That is 600,000 words. No. So any other final thoughts anybody'd like to add from the panel?
Yeah, I do. Anthologies are a really great way to practice your craft, to get into something that maybe you're not used to writing or want to experience writing, and can be a great way to network with other authors. And I think that's especially important. We have Passionate Ink, and so we do network with each other. We have these wonderful workshops. We have a Facebook group and the forums, and we do communicate with each other. And I think that that ability to find authors and create a support network for yourself is very, very important, because writing is solitary, and having that support group and that network of colleagues is very important.
And even if you're undecided about joining or anything like that, you can look at the people on this panel. They're all very helpful people. Drop us a line on Facebook or something if you have a question about writing, or anything like that. I wouldn't say we're here to help, but we do help, as much as we're able to. So
absolutely, 100% all of that.
Great. Well, if there aren't any other, final thoughts here, I guess, we're after 9 o'clock here, so we can wrap it up. But I want to thank all of our panelists and everyone else who's joined us this evening. It's been a really interesting workshop all around, and I hope you found it as interesting as I did. And if you're not a member of Passionate Inc., please consider joining, and you could be in our next anthology. And even if that doesn't appeal to you, there's so many other things that the organization offers. So I'd like to thank everybody else again, and have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you,
you.
Michael. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Michael.
Take care.